Jazakallah khairan, Brother Sami, for joining us today. Inshallah, everyone here, please keep Brother Sami in your du'as. Inshallah, he was a little bit sick, but alhamdulillah, he still decided to persevere and join us, alhamdulillah, today. And so we definitely thank him a lot for making the effort. May Allah preserve him and may Allah reward your efforts, Brother Sami.
I mean, barakallahu fikum. Thank you very much. Today is much better, alhamdulillah. My voice can be heard today. Yesterday was a bit difficult, but alhamdulillah, it's all good. Bismillah, tokan Allah.
Alhamdulillah. So I'll go straight into it, guys. Again, the event today, or the session today, Gaza Genocide and the Future of Palestinian Liberation. I'll quickly go into introductions, and from there I'll hand it off to Mosaab to kind of get the discussion going, inshallah. And straight into introductions, starting off with Brother Mosaab Sadeia. He is the lead on the Young Muslims National Expansion Team. However, he is also a contributor to different organizations and initiatives, such as MAS, MIST, Free Uyghur Now, and many other initiatives and organizations. So we thank him for taking the time to be with us today. My brother Sami Hamdi is the managing director of the International Interest, a global and risk intelligence company. He advises governments and the geopolitical dynamics of Europe and the Middle Eastern North African region, and has significant expertise in advising companies on commercial issues related to volatile political environments and their implications on market entry, market expansion, and managing of stakeholders. As you know, Sami is also has been in the past few weeks on a lot of other platforms that I've mentioned to you guys already, the Thinking Muslim podcast and others. He's also a commentator for Al Jazeera, Sky News, BBC, TRT World, and other outlets. As you guys know, again, as I mentioned, he's been very busy these past few weeks, inshallah. So again, please keep him in your du'as, inshallah. And without further ado, I will hand it off to Mosaab. Jazakallah khairan.
Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, everybody. Jazakallah khairan again for joining us. And we have with us, of course, Brother Sami. Brother Sami, number one, thank you so much for making it. I know you've had a ridiculous and crazy schedule the past few days, the past few weeks. So we really appreciate the time, and especially with the time difference, you being located in the UK and us being on the other side of the pond. So we'll get started. Bismillah. So the first question that we had, and I want this to be like, a bit of a discussion. It's going to be free flowing. I'll have, there are some questions that are prepared, but we do also want to make sure that we tease out everything for the audience. So the first thing that we have is, we all know that the events that led up to the situation now, and we know we're interested in knowing in what makes this time different, and what are the implications that this time has for the Palestinian cause and for the Ummah as a whole. So, if we can get your thoughts on that.
First of all, my apologies to you and everybody in the group for the lateness. I completely forgot that when the times go back, it means also that 9 p.m. UK time becomes 8 p.m. UK time. But alhamdulillah, we made it. And thank you very much for having me. And thank you to everybody else for whoever is attending this, and to anybody who will see the recording. I think the reason that this is particularly significant is that it's the context that makes it significant. It's important to remember that Netanyahu was standing in the United Nations 1 week before the 7th of October, holding up a map of his vision of the Middle East. And in this map, Palestine had been completely erased. In the same breath, he was saying that normalization of ties with Saudi Arabia was imminent, and that it would be the greatest deal since the end of the Cold War. The Israeli ambassador to the United Nations had told Cannes television in that week, just before October 7th, that normalization of ties with Saudi Arabia would mean, quote, the complete Arab abandonment of the Palestinian cause. The Israeli forces that are surrounding the Jenin refugee camp, that are lining up ready to annex the West Bank territory, were being reinforced. The Israeli forces on the Gaza border, called the Gaza Defense Unit, was being reinforced, suggesting that Netanyahu was planning to normalize ties with Saudi Arabia and then embark on an attempt to annex the West Bank and to try to force and put more pressure on the Gazans. The idea being that Netanyahu already had his eyes on an escalation with the Palestinians before October 7th, the events of October 7th took place. And it's in this context that what's happened is significant. Because if you remember that Netanyahu also sat with the Turkish president Recep Tayyip Erdogan, the first time that Erdogan meets with Netanyahu since coming to power in 2003, a picture that was used by the Israelis to taunt the Palestinians that one of the loudest advocates of their cause was now chasing an economic corridor and a gas pipeline in the Mediterranean with the Israelis and warmer ties. Netanyahu returned to Tel Aviv after the United Nations, absolutely convinced that the Palestinian cause was dying. If you note in Netanyahu's tweet yesterday that has since been deleted, Netanyahu says that he received intelligence that Hamas or the Palestinian factions were preparing an attack, but believed that they did not have the capabilities to mount the attack, and the intelligence did not suggest that they would be able to mount the attack. So the first significance is that at a time in which the Palestinians were supposed to be at their weakest, they mounted the greatest threat to Israel since 1973 and arguably even 1948. For the first time since 1948, the Palestinians temporarily managed to take back land that had been forcibly and violently seized by the Israelis. And that's why Netanyahu declared war, the first time Israel declares war since 1973, because the way that the Palestinians were able to take back that land suggested that their sophisticated tech capabilities had advanced to the extent in which they had demonstrated that they still had the strength and agency that everybody believed normalization had denied or was helping to diminish. So the significance is first in the manner in which it wasn't supposed to happen in the context. The second, in that they were able to take back land. But the third significance is that if you remember in 2021, when Israel was bombing Gaza, Benny Gantz, and this is open knowledge, this can be found on Google, Benny Gantz arranged a meeting with the heads of TikTok, Instagram, and Facebook. And in that emergency meeting, he asked for Palestinian content to be taken down and for shadow banning to take place and to restrict the reach of #Palestine and the like. The reason being is because articles were emerging, such as in the New York Times, and you can still find it by Nicholas Kristof, of which the headline said that the US-Israeli relationship is no longer unshakable, that the social media use of the Palestinians, which was then amplified by people around the world, had broken Israel's monopoly on the narrative. But when Israel agreed on the ceasefire after, they believed they could rectify that PR challenge. But this time round, it's become abundantly clear that Israel's monopoly on the narrative has been permanently broken, in that now you're seeing that BBC presenters are apologizing for falling short of journalistic standards. They're not doing that because the Israelis asked them. They're doing it because of the pressure on social media, because public opinion is no longer in favor of the Israelis. When CNN presenters, when Sky News presenters apologize for falling short of journalistic standards, that shows that for the first time in a long time, or first time since this conflict began, the Israelis have lost their monopoly over the narrative, and that has sweeping consequences for future international relations, as was indicated by a G7 diplomat who told the Financial Times that international relations will no longer be the same and we can no longer rely on the global south to support us with regards to Ukraine. For the first time in my lifetime, and according to the elders in their lifetime, a YouGov poll, which is the most trusted pollster in the United Kingdom, came out and said that 76% of Britons, of British citizens, are in favor of an immediate ceasefire. That's unprecedented. A Gallup poll in the United States showed that 60% of Americans are in favor of an immediate ceasefire. That's unprecedented. So on three fronts, the Palestinian cause was supposed to be dying. It's abundantly clear that it's no longer dying and that it's roaring. The Palestinians were supposed to be contained within Gaza. They managed to take back territory for the first time. Even if they didn't hold it, they showed the capacity to be able to take back those territories. That has frightened the Israeli government. And the third, global public opinion has shifted so much that today in Sky News, today you guys are behind me in the hour, so it's today for both of us. Today on Sky News, one of the former chief diplomats of the United Kingdom tells Sky News that even Israelis, the friends of Israel, are now distancing themselves from Israel, that it's suggesting that it's becoming so toxic to be seen to be support genocide, that even the former head of Israeli intelligence told Sky News, I don't understand why the world is sympathizing with savages and with animals, suggesting that they're losing their grip on the social media. Even if you were to put this video up on your YouTube channel, you will note that IDF adverts will most likely appear before anybody hears what we have to say here, suggesting that the Israelis are spending millions and millions of pounds to try to win back control of the narrative. When Blinken went to Tel Aviv to show support, and he said, I'm here in my capacity as a Jew, he was supposed to go to Tel Aviv and go straight back to Washington. The reason he went to Saudi Arabia and Egypt and these other countries, according to the Washington Post, if you see the headline, it says Blinken fails to convince allies on Saudi-Egypt trip. And underneath the headline, it says that Blinken had gone to these countries in order to ask for help to, quote, tamp down on public anger, suggesting that they're deeply concerned with the shift in public opinion because they are telling the world what is happening, but the Palestinians are showing the world what is happening. And that's why a lot of people, when they see what is happening in Palestine for the first time in 70 years, remember, before you had to rely on mainstream media to push the narratives. This time social media means we can directly see what's happening in Gaza. That's affecting neutral opinion and mainstream opinion to the extent that Elon Musk refuses an Israeli request not to allow Comstar to be used to provide internet access to humanitarian organizations after the Israelis had cut the internet connection. Even Elon Musk believes that he must lend help to the Palestinians against the Israelis. And that's why, and I'll finish on this point, even in the UN General Assembly, you'll note that when it came to the issue of a ceasefire, 126 or 128 countries voted for the ceasefire, but the US, the UK, and Israel voted against, suggesting that global public opinion is one way, but only Israel is becoming increasingly isolated, and they're deeply concerned about it. So these are the three significant things that make this particular round, in my opinion, something that we will look back in hindsight and argue that it was the turning point for the liberation of Palestine.
Yeah, it's actually very interesting that you mentioned the global public opinion part, because if you look at UN resolutions since 1948 about Palestine and about Israel, you will see that the overwhelming majority of them are actually against Israel, or they're put in terms where they're talking or they're, negatively speaking about the way Israel is treating the Palestinians. And you'll see also that the voting records on those is very similar. The vast majority of the world believes in one thing, and it's literally the US, the UK, and France who believe in something else, right? And they're little crony states, right? So it's very interesting that you mentioned that, because again, we're seeing that tape play out again. But the difference this time is that, like you said, the neutral opinion is being galvanized in support of the Palestinians. It's really interesting you mentioned the mainstream media part, because, when we talk about the rhetoric that we've seen in the United States and the UK from elected officials and mainstream media that are also putting that up, you'll see that there was actually a lot of pushback from people who are completely apolitical, from people who are, not Muslim, not Arab, people who are not connected with Palestine in any other way other than having the human connection towards, seeing people that they see as their siblings in humanity going through unprecedented suffering. And I think the best proof of that is what we've seen on the streets, right? We have seen massive rallies of unprecedented size all over the world. I mean, of course, when you look at, Arab countries and you look at Muslim countries, you'll see, Pakistan, they had the Million Man March. In Turkey, they had the Million Man March. But then you look at Western countries and you see massive, unprecedented, marches in London. Mashallah, you guys have been turning it out, hundreds of thousands every week. I think we hit our first 100,000 yesterday in Brooklyn and New York. So, considering all of that, how do you think this change in public opinion here in the United States and in the UK and in, ally countries in general, allies of, Israel, of course, how do you see that public opinion playing out, and how, the, Americans, for example, or the British and French, how, when they interact with governments, with their government, how do you see that playing out in elections, in advocacy, in policy, domestic policy? How do you see it playing out?
I think that before we discuss going into election, and I will answer that part, in terms of the immediate impact that it's having, we're seeing that Blinken, who told the State Department not to use the word ceasefire, finally buckled and began to call for what's called a humanitarian pause. That's not because Blinken suddenly cares about the Palestinians, but because the resignations in the State Department and the anger that is building in the State Department amongst Blinken's advisors means that he's had to buckle and try to come with some sort of concession that is called a humanitarian pause. The White House has been so concerned about public opinion that when Biden came out and said that he had seen images of 40 beheaded babies, they had to come out and issue a clarification that Biden had actually not seen images of 40 beheaded babies, and that instead he had been told by Netanyahu that these images existed. The reason the White House did so is because they were terrified of the public backlash of Biden affirming a lie that everybody knew was a lie. And when we see that Isaac Herzog, the Israeli president, when he sits with Rishi Sunak, the British Prime Minister, who had gone to Tel Aviv to show support for the Israelis, when the Israeli president turns on the cameras and says in front of the whole world to Rishi Sunak and rebukes him and says to him that BBC refuses to call Hamas terrorists, you must intervene and do so, this is ridiculous. The idea being that even the Israelis themselves are feeling that public opinion's impact on the BBC coverage, on the public policy itself, is beginning to show fruit, which suggests, and on a side point, that if Blinken is buckling as a result of the public pressure, that ordinary people such as you who are watching this, if he can buckle and call for a humanitarian pause, it means that momentum can be pushed in order to actually finally force him to call for a ceasefire. You'll also note that 2 days ago, the general who was sent by the Americans to advise the Israelis on their ground offensive returned back to Washington. And the suggestion is that he's upset that the Israelis are not listening and that they don't actually have a strategic plan. And Biden believes that public opinion is reaching such levels that his support can no longer be unconditional, and Netanyahu must start providing some answers to the urgent questions that the Americans are posing regarding what is the strategy here and what is it that they are trying to achieve. The reason that buckling is taking place is because of public opinion, the protest, and social media. That's the immediate impact. In terms of the elections or the like, we are seeing here in the UK, the Labour Party, the head of the opposition, originally went on a radio interview with LBC, and when he was asked, does Israel have the right to cut off electricity and water on Gaza in a clear violation of international law, in something that is clearly a war crime, Keir Starmer, the head of the opposition here, replied, Israel has the right to self-defense, Israel has the right to self-defense. The uproar amongst the Muslim members of the Labour Party, and indeed the left-wing parts of the Labour Party, was such that Keir Starmer rolled back on his statement to say, no, I don't believe Israel has the right to cut off electricity, and I never said that. David Lammy and Yvette Cooper, the senior members of parliament for the Labour Party, tried to find any mosque that would accept them so that they could talk to the Muslims to tamp down on Muslim public opinion. ITV reported that there were 2 emergency stormy meetings in their perspective, in which Sue Gray, the chief of staff of the party, warned that Muslim support had gone from 75% for the Labour Party to 5%, and that there was a crisis. The member of the shadow cabinet, which is the shadow government that will come to power if they win the elections, one of them is a Muslim member who is threatening to resign, and the belief is if she resigns, then others will also resign on the front bench of the opposition as well. The point here being, all of that is happening is because of public opinion, meaning that in the elections there is a indication that of a movement towards an idea of appeasing the Muslim population, altering the rhetoric on Israel and Palestine in a way in which they can maintain that particular support. In the US, we know that in some of the swing states that are going to be hotly contested between the Republicans and the Democrats, Muslims' votes will be absolutely vital in order to ensure that the Democrats keep the Republicans out. The reality is that the impact on the elections is not because the Democrats suddenly care about the Muslim opinion with regards to Palestine, but there is concern that the growing anger, that 0.something% that's needed, or that was needed in the last election to get the Democrats over the line, that might vanish because of Muslims who believe that while Trump wants to ban Muslims from entering America, Biden is slaughtering them in the Middle East without any remorse or the like. So in terms of the long-term impact of public opinion, there are two ways that it could play out. The first is whether Muslims are actually able to capitalize on the gains that they've made with regards to public opinion, and whether they're able to come together to form a united initiative with regards to messaging, and also in the way that they pressure their local representatives. But I think that even if they don't, in the long run, it's becoming abundantly clear that with the shift in global public opinion, the idea of being seen to be backing genocide will prove costly with regards to votes, not just amongst the Muslim population, but even amongst an American electorate. You'll remember that viral video of Ron DeSantis when he goes into a supermarket and they end up talking about Palestine and Israel, and he says Israel has the right to self-defense. And an American, we're not talking about people like me born and raised in London, but ethnically from North Africa. We're talking about white Americans responding to him and saying that I no longer believe you because I am seeing now what's happening with the Palestinian cause. And I'm so horrified by it that you can no longer count on my vote. So I think that certainly in terms of its impact on policy or the like, I think the impact on policy is already being recognized by diplomats who are openly stating that this will be a permanent break between the global south and the US, and that the US will no longer be able to garner the support that it needs against Russia and against China and on Ukraine and the like. And you'll remember the US has spent so much effort in just trying to win over support. The US will not be able to do that, and that will have ramifications for the way the global order operates. And in terms of the elections itself, it may not be the deciding factor, but certainly the threat or the potential of that threat will certainly mean that a greater attention will be paid to the views of the Muslim constituency, at least here in the UK, where they're perhaps much more influential politically than they are in the US or perhaps in France or the like. But certainly there is, in my opinion, a shift in the rhetoric of the politicians, and that shift is not out of a concern for Palestine, but out of a concern that if this public of anger is not contained, there will be election consequences. And even if we cannot identify what those election consequences are, the fact that they are recognizing there is a potential means there is a possible scenario for a punishment at the election. How that looks like depends on how we capitalize on it.
Absolutely. I think so. There's two things. Number one, I was going around listening to some high democratic strategists here in the US. There are many Muslims, many of them who are non-Muslim as well. And really the overwhelming rhetoric and attitude that I was getting from them is that on the inside, everyone's very worried about the Muslim vote being lost, and I think in many ways it is. I think it is definitely lost in a lot of the swing states such as Michigan, Indiana, lots of the Midwest states where the Muslim vote was very critical in winning the presidency, but more importantly also winning the Senate. So it was really, really, it seems like that is definitely the trend that we are seeing. And I think it is going to come down to, like you said, how we're able to capitalize on it. The second thing that you mentioned that kind of brings another question to mind. When we talk about public opinion, we've talked about public opinion in the Muslim world, or in the Muslim Ummah, I should say, and specifically the ones who live in Western countries. We've talked about public opinion in Western countries as well. But there are two constituencies that I'm very interested in your opinion on the public opinion there. If we look at Israeli public opinion, I mean, I've done a fair bit of digging deep into their sources and listening to their news as well, as much as is translated. And it seems like, I mean, number one, the rhetoric has gone as unhinged as it always has been, if not even more. But from the people, it looks like their trust in their government is below zero now. I mean, we've seen the videos of Netanyahu's ministers being kicked out of hospitals of injured soldiers. We've seen, government officials getting protested in the middle of the street, police stations being protested. And it seems like the public trust in the government is very, very low. I mean, do you corroborate that? And what do you think that plays a role into the future of negotiations that are coming? Because I don't actually want us to talk about what's happening now. I think everyone else, other than the Muslims, is being proactive about what happens after this escalation. They're already thinking in the future. And I want us to also get into the habit of that, So what do you think will be the effect of Israeli public opinion on the future negotiations that will most certainly happen once, the Israeli government realizes the mistake that they have made?
I think that to really emphasize this particular point about Israeli public opinion, it's important to highlight that the sole reason why we haven't had de-escalation yet is not because the Israelis believe they haven't achieved their strategic aims. It's because Israeli public opinion is so overwhelmingly against Netanyahu, with more than 80% in the polls blaming him for what's happened and demanding his resignation on the front pages of the Israeli press, that Netanyahu personally believes that his political future is now on the line. That if he stops this war now, he will have to face the Israeli people, and the Israeli people now are clamoring for his resignation. And that's why he's bombarding Gaza, but doesn't have a strategy about what he wants to achieve in Gaza. Because while he doesn't know what he wants to achieve, he knows that if he stops this current environment and escalation, then overwhelmingly Yair Lapid and these others in the opposition, or Benny Gantz, who's joined his war cabinet, will try to replace him and will try to unseat him, and there will be nobody who will shed a tear at his removal. Even the families of the hostages, Netanyahu has not attended a single funeral of any of the hostages that the Israeli bombardment has killed, because Netanyahu is terrified that the hostages will publicly lambast him, and that will really shift the Israelis against Netanyahu. We've seen that the families of the hostages have staged protests inside Tel Aviv itself against Netanyahu, blaming him for what has happened with regards to the fate of the hostages, and also blaming him for compromising their safety for the sake of trying to secure his political future. The point of Netanyahu refusing a de-escalation, or Netanyahu pursuing his political future, is so brazen and so glaring that Times of Israel reported 3 days ago from this recording, they reported 3 days ago that when Hamas released the 2 elderly hostages, the IDF and Netanyahu expressed frustration, annoyance that the hostages had been released. Why? Because they believe that the release of the hostages would dampen the political will and desire for a ground offensive. In other words, that Netanyahu will not be able to convince the Israelis of the necessity of a ground offensive if the hostages are released, implying that Israelis are not for the ground offensive and they're not supporting the idea of a ground offensive, which lends itself to this idea that what's happening is a Netanyahu project more than it is an Israeli project. It's about Netanyahu trying to keep the bombing of Gaza. You'll note that 2 days ago, on the night when the internet was cut off from Gaza, there were leaks from the Qataris that they were on the verge of a ceasefire, and that the Americans had welcomed and approved the ceasefire, and then suddenly Netanyahu upped the ante, escalated in Gaza, and the overwhelming perception is that it was Netanyahu, not the Israelis, it's Netanyahu who opposed the ceasefire because he believed that, based on his analysis of the political situation inside Israel itself, if the de-escalation and ceasefire is announced today, Netanyahu will be ousted from power and he will go down in history as the worst prime minister in history, as having brought about the greatest threat to Israel for no other reason than his own arrogance in trying to goad and provoke the Palestinians by putting that map up at the UN, and also trying to change the judiciary, and also trying to annex the West Bank, something that while many Israelis do agree with, they disagree with the methodology that Netanyahu has been pursuing. So to go to your point in terms of the public opinion inside Israel, I do think, and I agree with you, I think Israeli public opinion is not in Netanyahu's favor. It would prefer Netanyahu's resignation. They would prefer a ceasefire. That doesn't mean that they sympathize with the Palestinians, but rather they believe that the cost will be so high that it's not worth it. That a ground invasion will cost the lives of too many Israeli soldiers in the same way it cost the lives of Israeli soldiers in 2014. There is an American general, I promise I don't watch Tucker Carlson. I don't watch Tucker Carlson, but I happened to pass by somebody listening to an interview that he had with a retired US general who said that the US forces and Israeli special forces have actually tried to enter Gaza on a night raid. And in his words, they were cut to pieces. The reason that the Israelis don't want to do a ground invasion is because imagine yourself in Netanyahu's position. What is the experience of the Israeli army? This isn't the army that fought in 1973. This is an army that has been tasked with police duties. Then therefore their experience is breaking the bones of little kids, it's beating up the elderly and shooting unarmed teenagers. This is not an army that's used to a ground offensive against a population that is ready and that has a perseverance with regards to a high death toll, not because they want that perseverance, but because under occupation, they've come accustomed to that high death toll. The Israelis do not believe that the cost of a ground invasion or Netanyahu's project is worth it. And this goes back to the point you were making, in that, yes, we're talking about global public opinion, but what worries Netanyahu more than the global public opinion is that even those inside Israel do not support his ground offensive. And I'll finish on this point. It's worth noting that it took Netanyahu almost a week to form a war cabinet, because even the opposition parties saw it as a Netanyahu project and they blamed him for what had happened, and they believed that this issue could all be resolved if Netanyahu resigns. The point here being is the consensus even among the Israeli parties was that this was not something about Israel versus Palestine. This was Netanyahu messing up and him dragging Israel into the cleanup of his mess. And they smelled the opportunity to bring him down. And that's why some of the opposition parties have not joined his war cabinet, and why Israeli public opinion is against Netanyahu, and why it's Netanyahu who is refusing the ceasefire, not the Palestinians or even the Americans.
Yeah, it looks like every single party involved has been interested in, number one, a ceasefire, and number two, a release of the hostages, even if they haven't said it publicly, right? The Americans have, I noticed this as soon as they started to call in their reservists and they started to, line up on the border of Gaza, immediately Biden's rhetoric started to shift. And he said the word Palestinians after a week and a half into the bombing. And to me, that signaled that he is giving Israel an out. He is giving the Israeli government an out. You do not have to go down this path. We can find another path that still resolves your objectives, that still fulfills the objectives you're looking to do, but it doesn't have to bring about this massive human cost that they are going to have. And I mean, I heard numbers, I don't put too much stock in them yet, so I'm not going to mention them now, but it's so far from the Israeli government's own mouth, every single ground invasion or every single raid that they have tried to do on the Gazan border has resulted in failure, and they have not been able to properly breach Gaza and establish control over even a neighborhood. So it does really show. The last group of public opinion that I will ask about is the Arab world, right? Specifically the Muslim world and the Arab world, the ones, especially countries like Egypt, Jordan, Syria, Lebanon, where, of course, the economic situation is terrible, the political situation is unsustainable and oppressive, and also the social situation is boiling right now. I think that is the best word to describe it. How can we decipher their inaction, right? We've seen lots of saber rattling. We've seen a lot of, harsh words from the ones we believe to be well-meaning, and the ones who aren't well-meaning, we've seen complicity at its, best, or textbook example. So especially the ones who pride themselves on, the strength of their armies. I'm Egyptian. So, we grow up with Egypt has the best soldiers in the world. And, we're taught so much about the Egyptian army. And yet Egypt has its border bombed 3 times, and 2 times inside Egypt's borders in Sinai. So how can we decipher their inaction, and what does it play out in the Arab people, the Muslim people as a whole, in the other side of the world, but specifically the Arab people? How does it play out in the coming years?
I think there is an Arab saying, "Asadun alay wa fil hurubi na'ama." They are a lion when they fight me, but they're an ostrich in war. They put their head in the sand. I think that if we start with Egypt, and then maybe we'll talk a bit about Saudi Arabia and some of the other countries, I think that Sisi is in a very difficult position. Sisi is caught between 2 storms. There's the first, he's under significant pressure from the US and the Israelis to open the Rafah crossing so that the Palestinians can cross over, set up tents in the Sinai Peninsula, and Netanyahu can annex Gaza, and he will say to the Israelis, I'm sorry for allowing this attack, but look, I finally secured Gaza, and I'm going to build Vision 2030 with these hotels and resorts, and I'm going to give it to you, to a new batch of Israeli settlers. I'm going to give it to Jacob from Brooklyn. I'm going to give it to all of these people, and they're going to say, and they will forgive me for that. Sisi doesn't want to open the Rafah crossing because he knows that the historians one day will write that he was complicit in a Nakba. At the same time, Sisi is not receiving support from the other Arab states to push back against the US and the Israelis. And the only other power, the overwhelming power that a leader can rely on to push back would be the people. But to allow the people to protest when Sisi is aware how the people are against him and how they blame him for the crises of the country, Sisi is worried that if he allows protest in a show of force against the US or against the Israelis, that they will end up going to Maidan al-Tahrir or Tahrir Square, and they will call for the downfall of the regime, and they will call for, and that's also the problem in Jordan as well.
And we've seen that. We've seen that on Friday, the 2 Fridays ago.
They went to Maidan al-Tahrir and they started chanting social changes, and the Egyptians were very upset. The Egyptian government was very upset about it. So Sisi is caught in no man's land. And Sameh Shukri, the foreign minister, actually in a private conversation that was leaked to the Financial Times, said that, listen, if push comes to shove and you force us to take the Palestinians, we'll put them on boats and send them to Europe, and we'll see how much they like to deal with them with the human rights, which I think is very insensitive for a Muslim brother to say it about other Muslim nations. But it shows you how the Sisi government feels, in that they feel they're being put under this burden and pressure from the Americans and the Israelis, and they can't rely on the people. Jordan, likewise, the king of Jordan allowed room for protest. Tens of thousands took to the streets or the like, but we've also seen police being deployed to prevent the protesters from going to the border with Palestine, and also prevent them from going to the Israeli embassy in order to try to demonstrate their anger over there. I think that for Turkey, for Recep Tayyip Erdogan, for example, I think in the beginning, he played it very soft, an unprecedented position, very soft, in which he didn't want to alienate the Israelis with whom he was pursuing warm ties. But I think that given the unprecedented anger amongst the Turkish population, a viral video went of a Turkish man shouting very passionately, I don't speak much Turkish, but just listening to him, you can feel the passion, how it moves and makes your heart shudder, where he says, Erdogan, you called us out in 2016 to protect you against the attempted coup, and we took to the streets against the army. Call us now for the sake of Gaza, Erdogan. Call us now. Why are you silent and quiet when you should be the one? And Erdogan is reacting to that pressure. Even in Ankara, which is a secular city, a secular capital, we saw thousands take to the streets. Turks are furious with what's happening, and they are putting pressure on Erdogan to respond. And now Erdogan is going all out with the rhetoric, to the extent that the Israelis are now trying to threaten him that they will permanently cut ties. And Erdogan is getting to a stage where he thinks it's better to preserve support amongst my people than it is to really antagonize. I think Saudi and the UAE is a different case. I think that for the UAE in the beginning, they were very quiet. And then Blinken called them, I think, within 24 hours. Abdullah bin Zayed put a tweet out saying, I talked to my friend Blinken. 2 hours after that conversation, or after that tweet, they published a statement blaming the Palestinians for what had happened. And then there was a huge backlash, so they decided to announce aid to the Palestinians. But one thing that you notice about the UAE with regards to the impact of public opinion is anybody who knows the UAE, they will know that you don't talk politics except within the framework allowed to you by the government. So when you see Abdul Khaliq Abdullah and others being very loud in lambasting Israel, pulling no punches in the way, it shows that the UAE is uncomfortable at best, at worst. It's uncomfortable. It believes that it needs to be seen to be on the side of public opinion, but doesn't want to reverse normalization. We saw the UAE cancel events, festivals and the likes, not because they believe that they want to support the Palestinians, but because they are concerned by this public backlash. The one who is resisting public backlash, although initially buckling, is the Saudi Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman. In the beginning, for those who've been following bin Salman over the past few years, you'll notice that in the statements when he talks about Palestine and Israel, He's been gradually removing the word ihtilal, removing the word colonization, occupation. In one statement, he even referred to them as Israel between quotation marks. And the pro-Bin Salman commentators were saying that this doesn't mean we recognize Israel because we put it between quotation marks. But the point is, he was sending a signal that he's preparing for normalization, that he himself admitted in Fox News every day we're getting closer. In the beginning, Bin Salman panicked and he buckled. He went back to calling Israel an occupier, and he lifted restrictions on the holy mosques with regards to dua for Palestine. For those who don't know, during Ramadan, a series of rules were introduced. One of those rules said that the qunut or the dua should be kept short, but the private message to the imams was, don't go on about Palestine and current affairs because I want to normalize ties, and many imams were sacked when they disobeyed the order and they made dua for Palestine. Bin Salman lifted the restrictions on making dua for Palestine in Mecca and Medina, and we saw the imams making strong dua for Palestine. However, while the main commentators have been expressing support for Palestine, there is a louder trend now that is blaming the Palestinians, and Saudi bots have been attacking Palestinian accounts. Not only that, the Saudi Crown Prince, in a summit in Riyadh with the ASEAN countries, Indonesia, Malaysia, and these countries, in a speech of 5 minutes, he dedicated exactly 32 seconds, maybe 32.25 according to Premiere Pro when I was looking at it, but 32 seconds to Gaza. He didn't call it a war, he called it an unfortunate violence. He didn't mention Israel by name, nor did he condemn Israel, and he condemned the deaths of all civilians. It was a statement that the Israelis would be very happy with. And even though he mentioned a return to 1967 borders, which is an upgrade from what he was telling the Americans when he said that I'm willing to settle for anything that makes the lives of Palestinians better, I think that when you look at that, Bin Salman believed that Shakira coming to the kingdom was so important that it could not be cancelled for the sake of Gaza. When you look at how the boxing match of Tyson Fury and Ngannou was so important, and Eminem coming was so important for Mohammed bin Salman and the Riyadh season and Vision 2030, that Jared Kushner was so important that he had to give a keynote speech at the Davos in the Desert Forum that was held a couple of days ago. When you see that Bin Salman believes these to be of such paramount importance that Gaza should not be, that they should not be cancelled in favor of Gaza, when Turki al-Sheikh, the head of the General Entertainment Authority, ironically a descendant of Sheikh Mohammed bin Abdul Wahhab, when he comes out and organizes these events and then posts on Facebook yesterday, where he says, people are asking me to cancel these events, name me one football match or soccer match where you guys are at. Name me one football match that's been cancelled because of a political event. And he lambasts the critics and doesn't even have the courtesy to say, Allah yarham amwat Gaza, or Allah have mercy on the people who died in Gaza. He doesn't even put that in his tweet. It suggests that for the Saudi Crown Prince, Gaza is no longer a priority, and he's been able to deploy the mashayikh, the Islamic shuyukh in the mosques, who their main message over the past 2 weeks has been that ta'at wali al-amr, obedience of the ruler, is wajib. The ruler knows better than you. In the words of one sheikh, your analyses are burdensome and they are not qualified, and it's like you guys are like slugs compared to the ruler. And this is a message that is going out in all of the mosques. The point here being is that even when you look at Saudi Arabia, and I'll finish on this example, I'm just trying to show you the extent to which Bin Salman is resisting public opinion. If you look at the Kuwaiti newspapers or Omani newspapers or Turkish newspapers, the front page is a full page spread on Gaza. However, Ukad, which is the national newspaper of Saudi Arabia, has consistently dedicated 3/4 of the front page to the economic achievements that Bin Salman is achieving, and leaving 1/4 on the bottom right of the page, showing the destitution of Gaza, but not blaming the Israelis for it, and saying that it's just an unfortunate violence, suggesting that the government is resisting public opinion and trying to navigate it by finding Islamic justification for not talking about Gaza by obeying ta'at wali al-amr, even though it contravenes the ayah, where Allah says, فَإِن تَنَازَعْتُمْ فِي شَيْءٍ فَرُدُّوهُ إِلَى اللَّهِ وَالرَّسُولِ. When you disagree between the ruler and the people, go back to Allah and the Rasul. In other words, there are situations where the ruler can go wrong and you decide in favor of the people. But regardless, the point here being is bin Salman is tiptoeing around public opinion, giving statements that suggest that he's putting normalization at jeopardy by talking of 1967 borders, but telling Jared Kushner that normalization is still on the table by allowing him to give a keynote speech. So I think in terms of the Arab street, public opinion has forced Erdogan to abandon the speech of trying to يغازل Israel or to try to serenade Israel. He's abandoned that tact. King Abdullah of Jordan is now very loud in support of the Palestinians. Sisi finally allowed protests, albeit limited, but it shows how desperate he feels because of the public opinion. We're seeing cracks in this regard, but equally we're seeing an attempt by the Saudi regime in particular to try to push back against that public opinion. Having said that, and I'll finish on this point, and I apologize for going on about this, but having said that, the anger of the Arab streets is being noticed in the Western capitals and is being seen as something that is dangerous, that could escalate into something that will have lasting consequences with regards to the region. And some have even compared it to Arab Spring protests. So we might not have seen the maximum potential of the protests on the streets yet. And the enduring nature of these protests on the streets and the inability of the regimes to rein in those protests suggests the regimes are concerned and the Western capitals are concerned, not that something will happen, but that there is the potential for something to happen that could completely alter the political map of the region.
And I think the really interesting thing about that when it comes to, lots of the repressive governments who generally don't tolerate any type of expression of political opinion that is, or public opinion in any shape or form that is against the government, you're seeing a lot of them now allowing controlled opposition. So in Egypt, for example, Al-Azhar has been, speaking what the people have really been feeling in very harsh and strong terms that are almost reminiscent of Al-Azhar's, publications against the French occupation and the British occupation and, at the end of British colonialism in very harsh terms, in ways that a few years ago or even just last year would be completely unacceptable by the government, and under any other circumstances would be unacceptable by the government. And when we look at Jordan, for example, even the allowance of protests to happen is unprecedented. And I think that controlled opposition is very important because all of them are thinking about their seats, about what happens after this is wrapped up. And the context is really important too, because when we look at, countries like Egypt, Lebanon, these are countries that are in economic turmoil. They are on the verge of economic collapse, if not have already collapsed economically, and they're just really running on the mercy of Allah more than anything. That context is really important because what we are seeing right now is uprising, or the seeds of uprising being sown based off of the pains of the ummah. So now there's this idea, there's a thought going on, right? There's this idea that there is a tone of revenge or a blood of revenge that is needed, and they hold their governments accountable for it. And it's only being fueled by the enduring economic circumstances or the economic downfall that really the people have been experiencing for so many years. So the analysis for now, one second. Hold on, I think my microphone went out. Okay, we're back.
I can hear you. I can still hear you, yeah.
Okay, excellent. So we'll take a pause on the analysis because I think we've made everyone's head hurt, but I can go on for so long. Your thoughts are very welcome and very well thought out. And just before we continue to the next part, I'm very interested in what do you read? And I don't want you to put out your business secrets, but what do you read to stay very well informed on the topic at hand, and in general, how you stay appraised of the world?
I think that the first thing is to develop a perspective or framework within which you can actually analyze the events, because everybody can read the event and come to different conclusions. And I'll give you an example of what I mean. So randomly, I had forgotten some segments of Surah Hud. I was reciting it in Isha one day, and I realized I had forgotten some of the ayahs, and I was quite disappointed by it. So I decided to go back and try to rememorize it. And while I was rememorizing it, I came across the verse where Lut alayhi salam laments his weakness, and he says, قَالَ لَوْ أَنَّ لِي بِكُمْ قُوَّةً أَوْ آوِي إِلَى رُكْنٍ شَدِيدٍ. If only I had power over you or a powerful ally to resist you. And this is when they've come to oppress him with regards to his guests. When I read that ayah, it didn't click with me immediately. I made a small note on a piece of paper that prophets can be weak, and Allah has made it this way because He reserves the right of the outcome for Him alone. Allah decides the outcome. So when this whole incident blew up, and I was reading a lot of Muslims saying we feel despair, we can't do anything, or the like, I remember this particular ayah. And that's what, when you look at the following ayah where they say, you know, we are messengers from Allah who have come to punish them. For me, this applied directly here to this particular event. And that's what leads you to start analyzing where is it that we as an ummah are able to make a difference. So when you start reading that Blinken has gone to Tel Aviv, and then you read that Blinken has suddenly decided to go visit Saudi Arabia, it's in Surah Al-Zumar for whoever is looking for the ayah. When you look at Blinken then suddenly decides to go to Saudi Arabia, Egypt, Qatar, and to visit. When you read that event, all the headline is Blinken is going to decides to do a regional tour. You ask yourself why? What is it that is making Blinken do a regional tour after he's just gone to Tel Aviv celebrating he's a Jew and supporting the ceasefire? It means that something happened in Tel Aviv. A conversation took place that necessitates a visit to this regional power. What is it that these allies can offer to Blinken and to Netanyahu to remedy whatever issue that they have? So then you're looking at the region, you're thinking, okay, what is it that's concerning that the regimes have the power to do? They have the power to control their people. That's always been what they've had the power to do. So Blinken is going to the regimes, not to ask for military help, not to ask for any financial help. The only thing he could possibly be asking for, you see the deduction here, the only thing he could possibly be asking for is help to manage public opinion. At this stage, it's just theory. And then Washington Post publishes the article with that sentence, tap down on public gang. Okay, I got it. A plus B, A and B, C, D, and we got to the conclusion here that Blinken. Now, going back to the ayah Surah Hud, if Blinken felt it was necessary to go to the regional powers to talk about public opinion, it means that something about public opinion has concerned him. Therefore, when Lut alayhi salam made his lamentation that I don't have power, and the messengers respond by saying, Ya Lut, Allah has the power and Allah is going to deliver it. That means that the statement that we made that we don't have power, Allah has now demonstrated through this Blinken visit that He has power. This is what I mean when we look at ayah from a political angle. The idea being that you think you don't have power, but Allah has power. And this is why when Allah says, وَمَنْ أَرَادَ الْآخِرَةَ وَسَعَلَهَا سَعْيَهَا وَهُوَ مُؤْمِنٌ فَأُولَٰئِكَ كَانَ سَعْيُهُمْ مَشْكُورًا. He who desires the akhirah and strives for it, and he's a mu'min, or she's a mu'min, then those people, Allah rewards the striving. Emphasis here on the striving. That the outcome belongs to Allah, but the struggle belongs to us. The reason that links to your question, and people will think, why is he talking about Quran when I'm asking him what material does he read? The reason is because the Quran, in my opinion, provides the perfect political framework through which to analyze political events. Because where people see despair, you see opportunity. Where people see hopelessness, you see hope and you see value in every act that you're doing in order to try to bring about an opinion. When the BBC presenter apologized for the coverage of the protest, she didn't apologize because Israel asked her. Israel were happy with the coverage. They were happy that Palestinians were being denounced. She apologized because they were receiving so many letters of complaints from the Muslim population and beyond that BBC felt it's not worth the heat. Just give the apology. And that upset the Israelis. Public opinion forced that apology. When Blinken talks about the humanitarian pause, it's not because Blinken, the Israelis have asked him, we need a humanitarian pause. It's not because Blinken wants a humanitarian pause. It's because of public opinion. So you who you believe that your act is insignificant. That sense of insignificance comes because you want to be able to achieve the outcome, which only Allah has a monopoly over. Allah has the monopoly of the outcome. Lut alayhi salam saw his people destroyed. Nuh alayhi salam saw his people destroyed. Salih saw his people destroyed. Shu'aib saw his people destroyed. Hud saw his people destroyed, because Allah was making the point that the prophets can only exert strength within the powers that Allah has given them, but the ultimate power belongs to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. The reason this links back to the politics is because you read events and then you identify the opportunities. Blinken went for a regional tour about public opinion. Yalla guys, on the WhatsApp groups, hashtag Palestine, hashtag Starlink for Gaza, at Elon Musk, hashtag whatever, and you start seeing, you start amplifying it, because even if you feel like you're not having an impact, you clearly are. Even if you feel it's insignificant, Israel is spending all that money, millions, to keep you quiet. So when you talk about what you do in terms of reading, I read the headlines like everybody else does. I read what you're reading about Washington Post and the other. The difference, astaghfirullah, I won't say difference, that suggests that the Arabs say, A'udhu billah min kalimat ana. I seek protection from the word I. The difference between political analysts and between aspiring political analysts is that the political analysts read the headlines within the framework of what can I do to help to enact a change. Can I spread a message? Can I do a video? Can I host an event? If I can't, can I retweet? Can I share? Can I like? Can I mess the algorithm so that it prioritizes these posts? And when you see the impact that's having, you start analyzing politics in a different way. So, for example, I see that Saudi Arabia has denounced Palestine and Israel, denounced what's happening in Gaza, and they're using the word ihtilal. I know bin Salman's policies. He doesn't care about the Palestinians. When he uses the word ihtilal, me and you have read the same headline. We've read the same statement, but one person is saying Saudi is standing with Palestine, and I'm saying bin Salman is buckling under public opinion. He's buckling under public pressure. And that feeds into an analysis of, let's keep up that public pressure in terms of what's happening. I always get this question, what do you read or the like? The reality is we're all reading the same thing. We're all looking on Twitter. We're all looking on Facebook. The difference is, with what lens are you analyzing that news? Are you analyzing in the context of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam and the seerah, which I argue everybody should read as a political book, because you see the first 13 years how he's giving da'wah, how he's training his generation, teaching them how to talk, how he handpicks who he wants to send to Medina to give da'wah. He chooses Mosaab ibn Umair or he chooses Ja'far ibn Abi Talib to send. When you look at the way they decide the Khilafah after the Prophet ﷺ, this is all politics. The way they communicate with each other, the way Allah says in the Quran, وَلَوْ كُنْتَ فَضًّا غَلِيظَ الْقَلْبِ لَانْفَضُّوا مِنْ حَوْلِكَ فَاعْفُ عَنْهُمْ وَاسْتَغْفِرْ لَهُمْ وَشَاوِرْهُمْ فِي الْأَمْرِ. After Uhud, when they have disobeyed the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and Allah gives political advice. Allah says, "Ya Muhammad, if you're hard with them and harsh with them, if you're harsh with the mistakes of our scholars," to those today who want to criticize, like, you know, some of like Yaqeen or Sheikh Umar Sulaiman or Yasir Qadhi or the likes, for those of you who are harsh, be careful. They will leave you. They will abandon, they will move. So pardon and forgive them, and then consult them again in affairs. This is politics here, about how to bridge the differences, as we've done on Palestine. Bridge our differences on issues such as Syria or Sudan or Yemen or to come together for a common cause. This is politics. So to answer your question directly, even though it sounds like you asked me where's your ear, and I've done that, but the point here being is that when it comes to what do you read or the like, for me, the answer is less about what I read. I read what everybody else reads. The difference is I have a whiteboard where I try to kind of, why is Blinken doing this? Why is Biden doing this? Why is there a change in statement? Why did Erdogan put in the tweet when he called Mohammed bin Salman, he wrote an unusual paragraph. We talked about the need for common constructive statements with regards to Gaza. What that means is, in real lingo, in real talk, is I told bin Salman that he should be firmer in his language with regards to Gaza, and he shouldn't be trying to hide behind the wall. That's significant when you read it, because it implies that bin Salman is trying to. And when you have all of that, when you're reading all of this and when you've analyzed it, you have a better picture, so that when you receive an invitation to talk with you or this, you say to yourself, Allah, here is an opportunity to spread the message to talk to people across the pond and the like, so that maybe they will be able to deliver the message further, so that as an ummah we're a body that moves. That's one. Because from my political analysis, the policymakers are buckling because of us, not because of the governments. They're buckling because we are being loud, because we are being relentless in the way that we're raising awareness for Palestine. And that's why we need to amplify that and keep pushing that. And that's political analysis. So the short answer, and I promise to finish here, the short answer, just try it. The best advice I ever got in my life was when somebody said to me, read the Quran as a political book and read the Seerah as a political book. I'm not talking about what movements. I'm saying just try it. Look at the particular event and analyze the political wisdom behind it. And you'll find, subhanAllah, the Prophet ﷺ was a master politician, master tactician, even in the way that he forgave Quraysh after he entered Mecca. And they ended up delivering Islam to the rest of the world as well and fighting for his cause, whereas once they had fought against him. And in Palestine, it's more relevant than ever to view what's happening within the ayat of Quran al-Kareem. Allah is in charge of the outcome. Wallahu ghalibun ala amrih, walakin akthar an-nasi la ya'lamun. Allah is always in charge of what's happening. Allah knows what's happening in Gaza. Those who are dying shuhada are going straight to Jannah. وَلَا تَحْسَبَنَّ الَّذِينَ قُتِلُوا فِي سَبِيلِ اللَّهِ أَمْوَاتًا بَلْ أَحْيَاءٌ عِنْدَ رَبِّهِمْ يُرْزَقُونَ. Do not consider those who have died for the sake of Allah as dead. They are with Allah, yurzaqun. They are receiving reward. And Allah continues. Yes, they are فرحين بما آتاهم الله من فضل. They are happy with what Allah has given them. And for us, Allah delivers a message. ويستبشرون الذين لم يلحقوا بهم ألا خوف عليهم ولا هم يحزنون. That they are calling out to us, the people who have died, that we grieve for, that our hearts are broken over the disaster and the terrible genocide and ethnic cleansing that's taking place in Gaza. They are shouting and saying to us, do not grieve for us, because we are feeling no fear anymore here. We are happy with what Allah has given us because we are already in Jannah. There's no limbo. That's the majesty of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and His rahmah. The outcome belongs to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and He will decide it as He wishes, how He wishes, when He wishes. Whether it's in our lifetime or not, that's irrelevant. We are travelers in this dunya. The onus on us is, what do we do within the powers that we have to try to position ourselves as the vehicles to achieve the outcome. And that's why I brought the example, and I promise this is the final point. This is why I gave the example of how each prophet has a different ending with his people. Because what Allah is saying is that the prophets did their best within the powers they were given, but the ultimate punishment or success lay with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So when people say, what can I do, what should I do, what will be the scenarios, leave that to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. We've shown we can make a difference with our voice. Let's keep doing so, and maybe Allah will give us more power in future. But for now, we're using what we can, and we are making a difference. We are forcing a change. The policymakers are buckling, and we should continue what we're doing. And alhamdulillah that you've given me the platform for this, and we're all working together as one body to try to push this as well.
Allahu Akbar. Yeah, no. I think, like, for me, the immediate response when I saw what was going on October 7th and the days that came after, immediately you see like ayahs of the Quran happening in real time. In real time, in Surah Al-Hajj, where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, لا يقاتلونكم جميعا إلا في قرى محصنة أو من وراء جدر. They will not fight you, face to face. They can only fight you from behind fortified fortresses or from behind walls. Right, and you see that happening in real time when you see every single ground invasion, for example, that has happened, every single ground incursion that happens, massive losses. You see ayat happening in real time. That ayat continues. You think they're all united. You think they're so powerful. They look so powerful against each other. And even another translation of it would be that between them they look very mighty, right? But their hearts are actually disunited. You think that there's a lot of them, and they're actually very disunited. And then, subhanAllah, the ayah ends with ذَلِكَ بِأَنَّهُمْ قَوْمٌ لَا يَعْقِلُونَ, I believe I'm correct. لَا يَعْقِلُونَ, which means they literally do not think. They do not think. They're fools because they don't understand the sunnahs that Allah has created this world, the principles that Allah has created this world to follow. So subhanAllah, I mean, I totally agree with your point about reading the Quran and reading the Sunnah as political books. The only thing I would add is also reading Islamic history. For me, immediately, what I saw is that this is exactly the cycles of Islamic history that we're seeing, and the original cycle is the cycle of from the Sirah to the end of the Khulafa al-Rashidin. That's the original cycle, and you see that it's about 50. I believe it's about. I want to say it's about 50 years. It's almost 50 years, and that cycle will continue over different stretches of time throughout the entirety of the Sirah. You know, through the entirety of the history of Islam, and it's very interesting. I think you see a lot of parallels between the Battle of the Trench, for example, you know, Ghazwat al-Khandaq, between that and what's happening in Gaza right now. You see, you know, a lot of parallels where the entire world has come together to eradicate Medina. The entire world has come to eradicate Gaza. And yet Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, you know, he strengthens their resolve and he supports them from where we do not know. So, you know, going off of that, I wanted to transition the discussion a little bit into talking more about, you know, our individual responsibility. What does it mean for us, and what does our deen tell us about this? So I'm going to ask a very point blank question, and I mean, I really appreciate the long answers; they're excellent. But for this question specifically, I want one word: is there hope?
100, yes, 100%.
Okay,
100%.
that was 2 words, but I'll forgive you. Jazakallah khair. No, it's correct. There is hope. Why do you say that there is hope? What makes you so hopeful as, you know, the bombs rain on Gaza, as the death toll just keeps rising and rising, and as the world seems like it just gets more and more evil in their approach towards eradicating the Palestinians? What gives you so much hope?
2 reasons, and these are lessons from history. The first is, we often hear people say, you know, the Ummah is weak and the future looks bleak. My maternal side is Algerian, and my grandfather was a mujahid who fought against the French and kicked the French out of Algeria. 90 years ago, the Muslim world was under official colonization. The French were legally in Algeria. The British were legally in Egypt. Like, colonization was such an integral part of the global order that when France was liberated from Nazi Germany in 1945, and the Allies gathered to write the UN Charter, every man is born free, France celebrated in Paris and then went on to massacre 30,000 Algerians who took to the streets demanding their own independence. The French say they killed 12,000, Algerians say 50,000. I've gone for the middle ground, 30,000 Algerians massacred. The French believed, according to their documents, that because the massacre was so great, because there were rivers of blood, because in 1 week it was just slaughter, bringing some of the most barbaric militias to assist them in that slaughter, they believed that no Algerian in that generation would dare to challenge France again. The price would simply be too great. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had written that 17 years later the French would be kicked out, and 132 years of French occupation would be finished. I see parallels here in that we are despairing at the massacre and the slaughter that we're seeing. But French historians believe that the massacre in Stif and Kharata and Gelma in 1945 was the turning point in the battle for liberation. That was the turning point. And I think that we may look back at what's happening here as the turning point. The other point I want to make is that 90 years ago, the Muslim world was under official colonization. The reason we don't have official colonization today is not because the colonizers had suddenly a bout of an epiphany and said, wallahi, this is so injustice and inhumane and wrong, yalla, let's go back to our countries. It's because the Ummah, through its striving and its efforts and its relentless struggle, it kicked the colonizers out. And moreover, at no point in any of the liberation movements in Egypt or in Algeria or in Libya, at no point were the Muslims militarily superior to the colonizers. At no point were they military superior, and still they drove the colonizers out. Then we entered a period where nobody was sure what to do with the nation states. Tunisia and Libya tried to unite. They united for 24 hours, and then Bourguiba got cold feet and he left. Egypt, Syria, and Iraq, they united, I think it was 6 months or a year, and then it fell out. The Syrians couldn't tolerate the Egyptians and vice versa. But what happened is there was an attempt to try to create a unified bloc. Then the Arab Spring happens. At a time in which we believe that regimes were so invincible that we were condemned to live our lives with seeing only 1 or 2 presidents in our lifetimes. Ben Ali fell, Mubarak fell, Gaddafi fell, Ali Abdullah Saleh fell. The Ummah demonstrated that it could bring down invincible regimes and authoritarian regimes. In my opinion, the reason we see such aggressive repression of the Ummah is not because the Ummah is weak, but because the repressive powers believe that the Ummah, which banged and burst open the door to kick out colonizers, that banged on the door and brought down these invincible regimes, is banging on the door to freedom that is becoming increasingly open, and they're desperately trying to close that door. If the Ummah is not running, then at least it's walking. If it's not walking, then at least it's crawling. But the Ummah is moving forward. So when I look at this, I'll be honest with you. When I heard the stories of my grandfather in the mountains, him believing, they used to believe they would never see Algeria independent, that we would fight, but we know France is superior, that we might die and never see it, but it was worth striving and struggling in order to try to secure our freedom. When I hear his stories, they are not stories that I hear about today. We've moved forward. We are making progress. It may not be the way that you wanted it to be. It may not be the outcome that you wanted it to be, but Allah monopolizes the course. Allah monopolizes the outcome. The choice we have is in the striving in order to try to create an environment in which these changes can take place. So the Ummah trajectory is clearly going upwards. And this is why when I correlated with historical events and the general trajectory of the Ummah, in that Islam continues to be the fastest growing religion, it's the fastest growing religion in Europe, it's the fastest growing religion in the US, it's the fastest growing religion around the world, despite the perception that the Ummah somehow is weak. And that's why I say that the greatest tragedy is not that the Ummah is weak, but that it believes it's weak. Those who are oppressing the Ummah believe it to be strong, which is why they're all coming after the Ummah and trying to repress it. I think when you look at the trajectory, it all suggests hope. It all suggests that we're making these gains. Yes, it's turbulent. Yes, it's difficult, but this is a struggle and we are travelers in this dunya. We do what we can within our powers before Allah calls us back. And as long as we're in this dunya, we continue to strive. And there are tangible victories that this striving is achieving. And that's why I have hope. That's why I believe that no matter the outcome of what happens in Gaza today, the world now sees Israel as a genocidal state. They see Netanyahu as a genocide maniac. Israel will never again enjoy global sympathy. It will never enjoy the favor of global public opinion. And remember, apartheid South Africa, the government, enjoyed international support until public opinion made it impossible for international support to continue. The ANC were never militarily superior to the apartheid regime, but public opinion made it such that the UK and the Western countries went from celebrating apartheid to imposing sanctions, not because they suddenly believed apartheid was wrong, but because public opinion made it untenable to continue supporting apartheid. So I have hope. I believe Allah is in control. I believe there's no one better than Allah to be in control. وَكَفَى بِهِ وَكِيلًا. I trust Allah knows what He's doing. I'll do what I can within my powers, and the rest is with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Allah will hold me to account for what I can do and for what I should do, and I leave the outcome to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and I trust that He knows best. And even if I don't see success in my lifetime, the greatest honor is to be a vehicle to help set the stage for that inevitable outcome. We Muslims always want to be the ones to stand on the stage and say, I did it, but I think that's a glory that belongs to Allah alone. Man kana yurid al-izzata falillahi al-izzatu jami'a. He who seeks glory, let him know all glory belongs to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. No one shares in it. And that's why I think the honor is in being the vehicle. Victory belongs to Allah. The battle belongs to us. Walhamdulillahi rabbil alameen.
SubhanAllah, that's precisely it. And I think the very interesting thing about when you were talking about the stories of Algerian resistance fighters, how they thought, that hope of one day being free, even if we never see it, is worth putting our lives down for it. And I think you will see that as a repeated point in Islamic history when we talk about the fight against the Mongols, the fight against the Crusades, we talk about the struggle against colonialism. But I think that hope specifically that we are seeing with all of, Palestine, that we are seeing in Gaza, where people are saying, we don't care if we're going to be killed in our homes. We would rather be killed on our homes by the Israeli bombardment, as opposed to going and dying in the Sinai desert, safe from the Israeli bombardment. And that hope specifically has triggered a very interesting trend on social media amongst non-Muslims in actually being interested in Islam and being interested in the Quran and going and reading it and seeing what is this unbreakable hope that we are seeing from the Palestinians. Where is this faith coming from? And I think on the topic of hope and on the topic of faith, you said that you believe that victory 100% is coming, and you've given the evidence of that. And I think, I agree with that conclusion. So if we believe that it's coming and we believe that it's around the corner, whether it's tomorrow, whether it's years down the line, in our lifetime, in the lifetime of our children and those who come after us, what will bring the ummah closer to victory? What should the ummah be doing to bring about the victory of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? Because as we know, we are accountable. We have a role to play. What is our role to play to bring the ummah closer to victory?
Just to build on one of the points that you made, and I will answer the question. One of the most terrifying stories that I find in the Quran is the story of Sayyidina Yunus alayhi salam. Because the story of Sayyidina Yunus is one in which a prophet gets so angry with his people that he leaves them. But when he comes out of the whale, Allah has guided his people. As if Allah is saying that you do me no favors, I guide who I will. I'm capable of achieving all this by myself. I'm giving you the honor of being a vehicle for this. The point here being is when you mention the victory is coming, the victory is coming. Allah has promised it. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is able to do it as he wishes. And that's why I think that sometimes you don't want to be that person who sort of says, there's no hope and there's no regard. And then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala brings that victory and you regret that you are unable to identify that. In terms of what we should be doing, I think Allah has given everybody a certain set of skills and talents and put everybody in certain environments. And I'm not quoting the Taken movie. I've actually never seen the Taken movie. But the point is that he's given everybody a certain skills, set of capabilities, certain environments where that person knows best how to deploy them. Some of us are in media. I was talking to a hackathon where people are trying to create apps to help people identify products that they can boycott. They had all these amazing ideas that I understand nothing about with regards to tech, but they understand and they are using their knowledge and deploying their power in order to try to facilitate change. We are trying to talk about this using our ability, media, to spread the message and the like. We're seeing people, for example, who are involved in satellite technology trying to provide internet for those people. We're seeing journalists on the ground risking their lives to deliver the news. We're seeing doctors deploying their skills to try to keep as many people alive as possible to save lives. The Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam said, "Man ra'a minkum munkaran falyughayyirhu biyadihi." He who sees something that is wrong, that is evil, let him change it with his hand. And if he cannot, implying if you don't have the power to change it, then bilisanih, then change it with your tongue, condemn it, put pressure and the like. And if you can't, then condemn it with your heart, and that's the weakest of faith. Anybody who talks or raises awareness or mobilizes in a manner that raises an awareness with regards to Palestine is already in an elevated level of resistance against oppression. They're not in the bottom category. They're in elevated status. And that's why when it comes to this question, I get this question a lot. Do what you can. Martin Luther King has a really good saying that if you can run, run. If you can't run, walk. If you can't walk, crawl. But by God, keep moving. And that's the sentiment here. If you're worried about backlash and you don't have much ability, share, retweet, comment, amplify other people's voices, share other people's messages. If you can convey a message, then convey the message. If you can lobby, go and lobby. If you have money to fund charities, go fund the charity. If you have money to fund initiatives, go fund. Everybody has a different level in which they're capable of doing, and everybody will be able to answer that question by themselves. But in order to be able to answer that question, you need to remember that you have the power to do something, that Allah has given you a certain set of capabilities to do something. And when you appreciate that all the outcome belongs to Allah and your responsibility is the striving, suddenly you will see the opportunities that you can use in order to enact. In my case, it's about having a camera in front of me and speaking down the camera, posting it on social media, going onto the news, Sky News and the like, telling people that public opinion is changing, and in 48 hours it gets 3 million views, and the Israeli lobby get livid because how can Sky News publish it on their account, the idea that public opinion is changing? I'm satisfied. That's within my own capabilities. That's within I wish I had more power, but that's what I believe at this moment that I'm capable of achieving in terms of talking on other people's platforms, using this tongue of mine to try to get other people and convince them that this ummah is capable of something. I consider that at this moment in time, My responsibility is to destroy the defeatist mentality inside the mind of the Muslim so that he is liberated, and then he comes up with an idea that I don't have. And he says to me, you know, Sami, having thought about it, I have an idea, and I say, this is a great idea, let's encourage it, let's push it. I don't have all the answers, but I do know that once we liberate ourselves from the defeatist mentality, once we believe the Ummah can achieve something, the doors that will open, they will open from places that we never thought they would open from. We will have allies from places that we never thought we had allies from. Allah says, idfa billati hi ahsan, فَإِذَا الَّذِي بَيْنَكَ وَبَيْنَهُ عَدَاوَةٌ كَأَنَّهُ وَلِيٌّ حَمِيمٌ. That conduct yourself in that which is best. For the one with whom you have enmity today, tomorrow might be your warmest ally. وَمَا يُلَقَّاهَا إِلَّا الَّذِينَ صَبَرُوا وَمَا يُلَقَّاهَا إِلَّا ذُو حَظٍ عَظِيمٍ. The ones who achieve it, the only ones who achieve that, are those who are patient and those who have extraordinary blessing from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. The point here being is that we strive within our means. Everybody's in their environment. Do what you can. And when you taste that first victory, before an army goes to battle, they do skirmishes to convince their soldiers that they can win the battle. Win those skirmishes and you'll realize that you can win the battle. And I think at that point, everybody will be able to answer that question for themselves in a way that I'm unable to answer it for them.
Absolutely. And I think what I would add to that is there's nothing good that comes without sacrifice. There is a level of sacrifice that will happen. There will be defeats. There will be losses. There will be, challenges, jobs lost, promotions denied, having to redirect your life for this. And as long as you stay wise, and as long as you stick true to the formula, and as long as you didn't unwarrantedly put yourself in a place of danger that was unwise and didn't help anybody, you will be rewarded for that, but also you will still prevail, right? I think there is this quietist mentality that I've seen here in the United States, for example. I don't know if it's been the same in the UK, but there are a lot of people who want to speak out. They want to, be public, but they're seeing a lot of people losing their jobs for it. And they, decide to stay quiet, or they get worried about speaking out. Sacrifice is part of the path, right? With Badr, you had Uhud. With Ghazwat al-Khandaq and the trench, which changed the direction of the seerah, you had that period of time where, as Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala describes it in the Quran, إِجَّاءُكُم مِّن فَوْقِكُم وَمِن تَحْتِ أَرْجُلِكُم, like from on top of you, from under you, from your right and from your left. I'm forgetting the ayah, but it's as if the earth quaked and your hearts reached your throats, right? So that sacrifice has to be there. And I think a lot of times, unfortunately, living a life of comfort, we've come to the conclusion that pain is bad, and having consequences is bad, and it can't be an indicator of success. But actually, of course, the Quran tells us something completely different. So we're getting close to wrapping it up now. I want to ask you specifically, as this is Young Muslims, it's the largest youth Muslim organization in the United States. I want to ask you specifically, what is your opinion on how young Muslims, specifically, Muslims who are youth, who are in that young professional age, who are in that high school to college age, how can they make a contribution during this time?
I think that the best thing that I would advise is show respect to the generations before you by reading about them. Read about their efforts. Read about the sacrifices they made. Read about the gains that they made. Understand the privileges that you have that was achieved by their sacrifice. Understand what they went through, the battles that they fought, that you don't have to fight today. And the reason that you don't have to fight today is because of their efforts. Read about their dreams. Read about the challenges that they faced. Read about their hopes and what they wanted to achieve, but that they didn't achieve, and that they are hoping to entrust to you to achieve. Learn those memories. Inherit those memories. One of the greatest tragedies of colonization is not just the physical colonization, but it was the way in which they cut off the memories of the ummah from each other. Ibn Khaldun in his Muqaddimah talks about the affairs of the Muslims from Spain all the way to Persia and beyond. Because at that point, the Muslim consciousness was one. Our memories were one. Our consciousness was one. Because we read about each other, because we all mattered to each other, because we all inherited each other's memories, because what a Muslim did in Malaysia mattered to us, because it affected us, because it was something that we had an affinity for. But you cannot have an affinity for a memory that you've lost, for a memory that you don't have. Inherit those memories by reading about the people before you. And you will find that as you develop your own memories in this generation, you will find that it will resonate deeply with the memories that you've read about. You will find that your ambitions resonate with those before us. You'll find that your dreams and aspirations resonate with those before us. And you will come to appreciate them. You will come to learn their mistakes, and you will make sure that you don't make their mistakes going forward. I think that when it comes to the Quran, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gives us the stories of those before us so that we can inherit those memories, so that we can acquire those memories and essentially embody them, so that we can then make the decisions that are required in order to fulfill our obligations in our current lives and our current ambitions. Sometimes the youth are rushing to race in order to make change, but remember, there are people before you who also dreamed of change, who really sacrificed, who made those efforts. Learn about them. Honor them by learning them, inherit their memories, and hear their message for you. Hear their advice for you. Hear what they wished for you. And from then you'll find that today you think you understand the world, but in reality, you find your eyes open up more and more and more, and you'll suddenly see the world in a new light. And where before you felt that things were being hopeless, you'll see all these different opportunities, and you'll actually find a new way of looking at the world. I read the book, The Road to Mecca by Muhammad Asad at the age of 18 years of age, and it transformed my whole perspective on Islam and its role in the world. Muhammad Asad wrote the book in the 1930s, 1940s, but in it I felt I inherited his memories. I inherited his outlook on Ataturk's Turkey, his outlook on the liberation movement in Libya when he met Ahmed Sanusi, his outlook on Saudi Arabia when he met King Abdulaziz, his outlook on the Ummah that was trying to battle one of the most traumatic periods, and he made me appreciate their struggle. He made me appreciate their shortcomings. He made me appreciate they were human. He made me appreciate that their hearts used to cry and bleed for the sake of the Ummah, and how they dreamed that we'd be a united Ummah. I believe we should honor them by reading about them, inheriting those memories, and you will find that your political analysis and your approach to politics will change completely after you inherit those memories, because what you're inheriting is lifetimes of memories. So it's as if you've lived 100 times while you're living this one life of yours, and you will be able to see things better and clarify things better, and then you will be able to achieve great things, inshallah, bi'idhnillah. That's my advice. Inherit the memories of those before us by reading about them, and you'll find that the world looks much clearer and the opportunities become much clearer.
Barakallahu feek, jazakallahu khairan, Brother Sami, for that excellent answer. I mean, it's subhanAllah, when we look at like the people who come before us, one of the figures who really stands out in my life is someone, you know, Omar al-Mukhtar, for example, right? Sayyid Omar al-Mukhtar in Libya, who was a 60-year-old Quran teacher who brought the Italian colonial effort or colonial occupation in Libya to its knees with a bunch of old rifles and horses. That is what he did, and to the point where his file actually reached Mussolini. It reached his desk, and he's the one who personally had to sign the approval to send the reinforcement that later on captures and kills him. And only a few later that, I believe it was only 4 years, the Italian conquest of Libya gets completely thwarted, and they leave Libya. And the other thing about longevity of struggle, when we look at Algeria in particular, Algeria and you know, the Arabs, colloquially we know it as what's it called? I'm forgetting the word, but the land of a million martyrs, right? And really the reality is, yes, so the Ard Million Shahid, exactly. And the reality is that it's more than a million. It's actually over 6 million over the entirety of the colonial effort, which was almost 130 years. You're talking about continuous resistance against colonization for over 130 years, just about over 130 years. That is, you know, you're talking about generation after generation passing on this dream of a free Algeria and a free life. And I want to end off with this last question. You know, Jazakallah khair really for your time, and we're sorry for keeping you up, but it's been an absolute pleasure having you. The last thing that I would like to ask you is, can you share any personal reflections that you haven't shared so far that you have had this past 3 weeks, maybe specifically the reflection that brings you the most hope, or the reflection that, let's be exclusive, the reflection that you haven't said in any other interviews so far?
I think that, to be honest, I've always believed that the Ummah has strength. But in the last 3 weeks, I saw it. And I saw that the Ummah is not dying, that it cares, that it's roaring, that it's mobilizing. When the events first took out, I took out the camera and I recorded an analysis stating why it's significant and why it's unprecedented. People saw the video, and a few people invited me to speak on their platforms. And then other people from other countries invited me to speak on their platforms. Then Yaqeen contacted me asking me to speak on their platform. Then One Path Network asked me to speak on their platform. Suddenly, I felt that, and again, na'udhu min kalimat ana, I seek protection from the word I. In the beginning, I felt a despair, but I said, I have to do something. So that video that I did on my own was something I felt, you know, it's just my contribution. It probably won't have an impact, but I can't stay quiet. You know, I'm gonna, you know, like it's, when I see that in the past 3 weeks, the video that I did in Wembley in United Kingdom led to B, which led to Yaqeen, which led to One Path Network, which led to Sky News, which led to our gathering here. I have coordinated and liaised on efforts with brothers in America, in France, in Spain, in Malaysia, in North Africa, in the Arab world, in the space of 3 weeks. I felt that I started this alone, as everybody else did. And suddenly I feel like the Ummah is moved, the limbs are moving and coming together as you're reaching out to me, as I'm reaching out to everybody else and the like. Suddenly our message is together. It's like Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has said, you strove, I'm going to amplify it. You made the decision to do something, I'm going to amplify it. You took 1 step, I'm coming 10 steps. You took a mere effort, I'm making and amplifying it. The effort objectively is insignificant, but I have amplified it to make it significant. And I have managed to, and this is why I meant Allah holds the outcome. We're striving, but I promise you, it's Allah who is connecting us. It's Allah who's connecting the efforts together. It's Allah who is making it feel like the Ummah is moving. And that's my reflection, that Allah is alive, Allah is real, Allah is mobilizing, Allah is rewarding the striving before our very eyes. And that's an extraordinary feeling when you think of the despair that many Muslims felt when Netanyahu in the UN held up his map, and when bin Salman brazenly said that we're getting closer to normalization of ties. We thought the Palestinian cause was dying, today it's roaring. And as we're mobilizing the efforts, we who thought were insignificant are demonstrating that we can be significant. And that's the personal reflection that I have. The reason why I've been repeating this where I go is because for me, this is the greatest victory that we have as an ummah. It's the greatest victory that we're demonstrating, that the ummah cares, that the relationships between us matters, that the ties of our deen, the ties of us as Muslims is superior to our ethnic, that we are feeling the same pain, not because we are the same ethnicity, because we're not, but because we believe in the same Lord, because we believe in the same deen. We have demonstrated that in a world of nation states, the ummatic identity matters, and that we prioritize it, and that we love it, and that we elevate it, and that we are so powerful with it. That's what I'd like to share, and that's what I want every Muslim to feel, because this is the starting, this is the launching platform. It shows what the Muslims are able to achieve when we come together, when we mobilize within the powers that Allah has given us. And that's what I think is the most beautiful thing for me over the past 3 weeks. We ask Allah to accept the shuhada amongst the Palestinians. But as I said before, I think this is a turning point. And the reason it's a turning point is because the Ummah is making gains that it has over the past 90 years. But the Ummah is starting, I think, the Ummah is starting to believe that it's not weak, that it actually has power. And I'm desperate to make sure the Ummah never again believes that it's weak, and that it has the capacity for power, and to encourage it to finally use that power for the sake of trying to resolve some of these causes. We brought down colonization. We showed we can do it in the Arab Spring. The next chapter, inshallah, will be another major victory. And bi-idhnillah, we will have the honor of being the vehicles for bringing that about, inshallah.
Inshallah, inshallah. Jazakallahu khairan, Brother Sami. It has been an absolute pleasure having you. So as we close off, I wanted to remind everybody, number one, the takeaway from this is, you know, aside from the analysis, I know everyone loves the politics, but aside from the analysis, it's really important that, number one, we know what it is that we're talking about, we know what we're saying, and then number two, that we actually do something about it, and that we always do something. As Brother Sami has said, our voices that we take for granted, that post that you put on Twitter, on Instagram, those stories that you post, they wouldn't be rushing to censor them and take them down if they were meaningless, if they couldn't do anything, if they were not, you know, if they weren't a vehicle for change, they wouldn't be rushing to take them down. So continue to spread the truth, continue to attend rallies, continue to show the world that we as Muslims care about Palestine, and we will continue to care about Palestine. A few closing notes. Number one, there are a lot of protests that are happening right now. I mean, there are a lot of there was a really big one again yesterday in Brooklyn. There's one that's coming up next weekend in DC, inshallah, on November 2nd. I highly encourage folks to attend if they can. Our entire power is through showing the momentum and showing that Palestine is not something for a few weeks, for 1 month. It is that it is an existential issue that we will care about because it is part of our deen. And then the last thing that I wanted to close off with is thanking Brother Sami for joining us, thanking you all for joining us as well, thanking YM New York for building this platform where we can talk about this very important issue. Subhanakallahumma wa bihamdik, nashhadu an la ilaha illa ant, nastaghfiruka wa natubu ilayk, a'udhu billahi minash shaitanir rajim, bismillahir rahmanir rahim, wal 'asr, innal insana lafi khusr, illa alladhina amanu wa 'amilus salihat, wa tawasaw bil haqqi wa tawasaw bis sabr. Jazakumullahu khairan, everybody, and assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.